Morning, everybody, and welcome to Environment and Agriculture. We will start the day today with a work session on HB 56 and HB 253. Let's start this morning with the Pledge of Allegiance led by Lisa Smart, Representative Smart.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So this morning, we would like to do some work with our committee to discuss some amendments that have been brought forward for HB 253 and HB 56. And why don't we start out with HB 253, establishing a committee to study extended producer responsibility. And I believe, Representative Murray, you have the amendment which was put forth by Representative Bixby, who unfortunately cannot be here today due to illness, although I understand he may be listening from home. So good morning, Representative Bixby.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so what you have before you is the original amendment HB to HB 253, which is 2023-0776H. Basically, as we had discussed initially, we had 3 members named to the House of Representatives appointed by the Speaker, and instead of 2 members, there is 1 member, as we discussed in our last work session. We also then, in lines 11 through 13, included the statement that we should be reducing the tax burden that solid waste disposal places on municipalities. That was added in there as well. There is a Scrivener's error on line 14 that says exam. It is meant to say examining or examine existing EPR laws. And so that includes states, territories, and international jurisdictions and established priorities for more in-depth study. It then further on line 17 asks that we look at how ways in which laws could be adapted to existing solid waste recovery infrastructure. And then in lines 20, it gives the study committee the authority to solicit industry stakeholder input on approaches, suggest possible legislation, and then also propose targeted study legislation for approaches to adopt in the future. And that also then allows the committee to work on a broad range of stakeholders, with a broad range of stakeholders and have them at the table.
Okay, thank you. Representative Comtois, you had a question?
I do. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, it says propose more specifically targeted legislation, which says that you're going to actually propose legislation. Wouldn't that say may propose or could propose instead of saying that you're actually going to propose? I'm just asking.
No, I think that's a fair point, Representative. I think the goal is to put forward potential pieces of legislation so that we can work side by side with those in the solid waste working group, as well as then to have input from stakeholders from the department.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Well, I believe that we had discussed in the previous discussion about this amendment that both line 22 and 24 was going to be saying suggesting rather than proposing.
Okay.
So I don't know if we would have time to
I'm certainly
make that change.
happy to look to see if I could get that word changed from propose to suggest in line 24.
Yeah.
Is that the question?
Mm-hmm.
If I can, I'm happy to.
Or Representative Comtois, how would you want to word that differently?
It says in 20, Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry about that. It says here, suggest possible legislation and or rules for implementing approaches. And then I think it should be may propose or could propose, but proposing means that it's definitely going to happen. Where it doesn't necessarily have to happen. We could suggest, we can do that. I mean, so 22 and 23 really take care of that entire section if you think about it.
Okay. So you would want to add in the word may before the word propose on line 24? Representative Comtois? Or
Thank you. So I'm just wondering if line 22 and then line 24 are very similar. Because I think they're kind of redundant in a way, because line 22 says suggest possible legislation and or rules for implementing approaches that would be readily adaptable to New Hampshire. And then it goes propose more specifically targeted study legislation. But if we're going to already suggest possible legislation or rule changes, do we really need that line in there?
yeah, so I agree. I think that probably line 24 and 25 could be just eliminated. Representative Dutsey?
You know, I was reading that, and I think I had to read it several times to understand it, but I think the first one, line 22, is suggesting possible legislation, and then line 24 is propose more specifically targeted study legislation. So the one is suggest possible legislation, which I understand could come out of that. And then I think what they're also saying is because this is such, you know, a broad and difficult subject, that they want to propose more targeted study legislation. So another study committee may come out of that. So I think that's the difference.
And you don't see that line 22 and 23 would cover that? No? Representative Comtois?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also know that we also have a solid waste working group that works on all of these issues. And I don't think that this particular group needs to worry about that, because the solid waste working group, which encompasses a much broader scope of things, could come before people or do the suggestion or proposing.
Representative Howard?
The way that thank you, Madam Chair. The way that I read it, it seems like line 22, number 5, is talking about either legislation or rules, and rules being a different, you know, coming from a different source. So that I think that is an important distinction. And also that number 6 on line 24 and 25, they're talking about looking further forward to legislate things that are difficult. So the first one is readily implemented, and the other is difficult to implement. And I think that it's not unfair to ask them to have two deliverables.
Representative Nab?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I mean, I just want to agree with that. I think to the point you've made in past conversations, there will be things that are easy to tackle, and there will be things that will be much more complicated. And I view it as line 22 is speaking to those things that are sort of low-hanging fruit in terms of starting to work on producer responsibility, and line 24 is acknowledging that there are going to be these more complicated items that will require further study. Thank you.
Representative Murray?
Oh, I think the vice chair had a question. Did.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, well, go ahead, Representative Creighton.
Thank you, ma'am. Yeah, the way I read this is a study is a subset of legislation. And if you put legislation in on 22, then study is inherently part of it. And it's up to the committee to decide how they want to deal with that, whether they want to recommend a study legislation or whether they want to recommend a specific act. I think 6, in my opinion, is that 6 could probably go away, line 24 and 25, and still be covered in 5.
Representative Comtois?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree, and I think that because this report is due out November 1st, to suggest possible legislation and what they're going to be studying, and then to more target. I mean, you're actually broadening the scope of what they're doing in a limited amount of time. I think it was discussed that we would do the suggest because we really need to focus on what we could do immediately. And that's why we were forming this study committee, because to take some of the workload off of the solid working group.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Would it be agreeable if, based on the comments that we were hearing, to simply say at the end of line 23, and may propose topics for further study?
Yeah, that sounds fine.
Would that be agreeable? If I can get
Yeah,
that
yep,
changed? Okay.
yep.
And then removing lines 23, or 24 and 25.
Yes.
Okay.
And change the word examine. And then
Yes.
if they can get an amendment done for us by the time we come back for exec session, I hope, maybe.
Will do my very best.
Okay. Any other questions or comments about this particular amendment? Seeing none, I think we can move on to, move on to HB 56 and talk about the amendment for that. So, hang on 1 minute. Okay, so for HB 56, there's also an amendment being brought forward by Representative Murray, and I'd like her to explain that to the committee.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, so
Everybody has copies of that, by the way, correct? Okay,
Correct.
thank you.
yes, so this is Amendment 0772H. I wanted to, based on the conversations that we had last week regarding HB 602, which we have retained, correct, Madam Chair?
Yes.
And also the HB 56, which we had a work session on, had wanted to make sure that I first addressed that we had a long conversation about the ability for the department to have some flexibility in being able to establish some rulemaking authority. And I perhaps did not do the best job of highlighting that facet, which it was already in the original proposed amendment you had last week, which was subparagraph D, lines 22 through 30. So I want to draw your attention there, in which it does give the department some opportunities. It specifically says the department may adopt rules under RSA 541A to allow for the use of project improvement allowances that may enable a project to meet the minimum 5-year setback, even if it is located less than a 5-year distance of travel estimate to a surface body of water. So to that end, that was a large part of our discussion. There are things that the department may, in their rule making authority, determine are beneficial and go above and beyond the scope of what they normally see. And so I thought that that was an important aspect to make sure that I noted. I also wanted to draw your attention to line 30, where we had the Scrivener's notation that needed the small superscript -5, and I had that clarified. I also then, listening to Representative Simon and some of the folks who were discussing aspects of HB 602, felt like on line 8.5 through 10, that the department shall not issue a license to a facility with a footprint that overlies a significant sand and gravel aquifer. So that is one aspect that I felt was important to make sure that we were in the interest of water safety, noting.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Representative Murray? We have Director Wimsatt with us from DES, and I would call him up, please, to help answer a couple of questions I have. Good morning, Director Wimsatt. How are you?
Morning, Madam Chair. Very well, thank you.
I did give you a copy of this amendment, and I wanted to get your feedback on and your thoughts about some of the issues that this amendment addresses.
Sure. Well, again, for the record, Mike Wimsad, Director of the Waste Management Division for New Hampshire DES, and thank you. I did just receive a copy of the amendment. I guess, and I may have misunderstood it, and you may have said this, Representative Murray, but it sounds like the amendment has very similar language relative to the project improvement allowances that the original bill had. Is that correct? Yeah, I just want to make sure that I don't read anything very different in that, so I don't have anything to offer with respect to that portion of the amendment. With regard to the introductory paragraph on line 9, the reference to not issuing a license to any facility with a footprint that overlies a significant sand and gravel aquifer, I think there would need to be some kind of a definition of that, because that it's not clear what that specifically would refer to. And obviously the agency would need to know exactly what that means if it were to evaluate a particular permit application to make sure that it either did or didn't comport with that requirement. With regard to the section D on line 29, it says that no allowances shall be given for a site where any measurement made of in situ soils within the property has an undisturbed hydraulic conductivity greater than or equal to 1 × 10⁻⁵ centimeters per second. I think that's very similar to the language in the introductory bill, as the bill is introduced. And as I think I mentioned during the previous work session, we have some concerns because you could absolutely do one in situ sample at one location and see a hydraulic conductivity that's higher than that. It would not necessarily really have any relationship to how long it would take for groundwater to travel from the site to a surface water body. But if you had that measurement in hand, you'd have to say, you can't have a permit here. And I think that's a little too, we feel that's too restrictive, because I think that could inadvertently result in sites being eliminated that were otherwise quite appropriate for landfill.
Okay. Representative Knapp.
Did you want to ask a question?
No, go ahead, and then I'll
Okay,
have a
thank you, Madam
question.
Chair. So is your concern with that last line, the directionality, like that you would have that rate of travel in a direction that wouldn't be toward the body of water?
That could be one example, but even more generally, because of the variability and the heterogeneity of our soil formations at sites where landfill would be developed, you can absolutely, and I would venture to guess that at every single site where a landfill is currently sited, there are soils in place that would test out in an in situ hydraulic conductivity test at greater than 10⁻⁵ centimeters per second at a higher velocity than that. It doesn't mean that that is contiguous and that there would be a meaningful possibility that groundwater that was, the contaminated groundwater or contaminants in groundwater could travel at that speed throughout their pathway to a surface water. It's just not
Okay.
the
I
way
ask
the
a-
current situation is.
I have a follow-up.
Sure.
Do you have a suggested change to that? Is it that the rate of speed is concerning to you, or would you want more test points where it would have to be a certain number of them would reach that rate of speed?
I think if you're going to use that as a metric, you would need to require that a more thorough analysis of the actual pathway of the hydraulic conductivity of the soils as a unit, and that takes more extensive testing and certainly more than one data point. And I think this essentially suggests one data point would be determinative.
Representative Murray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Wimsatt, if you could tell me, in rules, though, isn't it my understanding that when you're taking those test points, you can determine how many of them you're taking?
Certainly, those kinds of tests are made, and yes, at some level, someone always has to decide how many. But that's not what this says. That's what I'm offering my analysis based on what the sentence, the way I read the sentence, the way I understand it, and the way I understand that sentence. If an applicant goes and takes 50 tests of hydraulic conductivity, and 49 of them are much more much less conductive than 10 to the minus fifth centimeters per second, but one of them is greater than that, then the site is excluded from consideration.
Representative Creighton?
Uh, Thank you. This, the rate, centimeters per second, that is directly related to the length of time it takes that contaminated water to reach that 3-year period.
It's important to understand that it's part of a groundwater velocity equation. So when you read soils that say 10 to the minus 5 centimeters per second, that doesn't automatically relate to that's the velocity of the groundwater. It's dependent on hydraulic head difference across 2 points. It's dependent on a number of factors that essentially determine that.
But, so my point, Madam, for
Sure.
the follow-up.
Go ahead.
So what I'm trying to get at is that by saying 3 years in the previous paragraph on line 28, what that is defining is how close we want it to be. And then it's up to you guys to figure out how fast that water travels based on the soil conditions. So if we took out those last 2 lines, you're still got to figure out the 3-year point.
Absolutely,
And
yes.
is that 3-year point reasonable?
Uh,
Is that reasonable?
And, as I think I've indicated in prior testimony, we don't know because we don't have a lot of information about, and we don't know about a future site that might be proposed. It's just hard to say what it would relate. We don't know at this point how many sites would be eliminated by a standard like that. And we just don't know the answer to it.
Okay, thank you.
Director Wimsatt, if you would, please describe to the committee the kinds of rules you already have in place which take into consideration the hydrological studies. I mean, I guess I'm looking at some testimony that Adam Finkel had brought to the committee regarding several landfills that we already have. He said the majority of landfills that New Hampshire relies on today would likely have passed the HB 56 test. Of our state's 3 large active landfills, 2 of them are located in soils where groundwater flows at 1 foot a day or less. Only the proposed Dalton site, well, he goes into that. But he's saying that Mount Carberry, Turnkey, Bethlehem, they all had these they would have passed the test, so to speak. And so I'm thinking then that our rules that we already have in place are adequate enough to be safe for these landfills. Am I wrong in that thinking?
Well, that's a fair question. To be candid, I don't know how anyone necessarily, unless they have access to an awful lot of data and analysis, knows whether or not those facilities would meet this particular standard. There's been a lot of testimony in that regard, but again, I'm not sure. And again, it said likely. I don't know how likely it is. I don't know the answer to that. I guess to answer the second part of your question, the rules require the site specific, or the standard setback that's been discussed, but that's a minimum. And then there's also general language that requires that a complete hydrogeologic study be conducted, and that the agencies should not approve a permit or a landfill siting that is not protective of surface water and groundwater. And as I've indicated earlier, we really focus on the groundwater because the groundwater is right there immediately at the landfill boundary. It's right, groundwater is essentially everywhere in New Hampshire, right? So if you site a landfill, there's groundwater under the landfill, there's groundwater immediately adjacent to the landfill, and we focus our protections on that. I think by default, the surface waters end up being protected because we're so focused on groundwater protection and monitoring to ensure groundwater protection, and a whole series of procedures that occur when we detect an increase in background concentrations of any contaminant immediately adjacent to a landfill, that's really what provides that protection for surface water, because if you protect the groundwater, you're protecting the surface water, essentially. And it does also require that we make a determination that the landfill siting is protective of surface water. But again, I think in practice, the way that happens is through us ensuring that we can protect groundwater and that we're able to monitor both groundwater and surface water impacts over time on an ongoing basis.
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I think to that end, we have been working on something to this end for quite some time. And I think that it is really important to remember that what we are asking for is for this to be set in statute versus rules. Just a minimum commitment to saying that we need to make sure that there is a level that is the bare minimum set in statute. There are other things that may then seek to exceed protections set forth in rules, but currently we don't have anything set forth in statute other than that arbitrary 200-foot setback.
Thank you. And Director Wimsatt, do you find that the rules that we have in place now, are they compatible with this statute that we're considering, this bill that we're considering?
The bill, I guess what I'd say is that they impose additional restrictions that are not necessarily contained in the statute. So I'm not sure I completely understand your question.
So we're considering this HB 56 and its amendment.
Mhm.
And I'm wondering whether the rules that we currently have in place are compatible with what we're considering in this legislation. In other words, would we have to change significantly the rules that we already have in order to abide by what we're seeking to put in statute?
Yes, if HB 56 were to pass and be enacted into law, we would have to significantly change the rules to implement those very specific requirements.
Would the rules then have to be made more stringent?
I think that they would be more stringent. I mean, if we were to adopt the specific provisions in this, those rules would be more stringent, yes.
Representative Germana?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Director, for taking my question. I just want to follow up on a question that was asked by Representative of Creighton about, would the 3-year rule, for example, be reasonable, right? And your answer was, if I jotted this down correctly, we don't know how many sites would be eliminated, right, if we were to adopt that rule. But isn't that always the case when you have a rule? I mean, isn't actually that kind of the point of making a rule, is that you don't know ahead of time exactly how many sites are going to be affected, and that's why the test has to be done in the first place. So whether it's a minimum of 200 feet or if it is a 3-year rule, the same answer would apply, that we don't know a priori which sites are going to be affected and which are not.
To a certain extent, I think that's true, but I think in the case of this bill, the sense is that it could be substantial. The concern that we've expressed in the past is that without knowing for sure how this would play out in practice, we don't know if it would substantially reduce the number of the availability of eligible sites for landfill siting.
Representative Haskins?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wimsatt, would you agree that there may come a time, sooner than later, where a landfill site requires we update the rules so that we don't have a situation that the current rules don't cover? It's an old rule, and I think we're here because there may come sooner than later a proposed site that requires additional protection. And to put it in statute gives you the wherewithal to recognize that we may need to adjust the rules somewhat and update them for a site that has not been previously covered as in Turnkey, Carberry, and Bethlehem.
If I'm understanding your question correctly, certainly the agency believes that continual evaluation of the rules and how they're working and how they're applied in the current situation and prospective future situations is an important part of what we do and what the legislature does. And certainly, I mean, I think it's important to understand though that when a bill is passed, if it's very prescriptive, the agency's discretion is basically eliminated at that point. If the rule is very prescriptive about how a particular thing is implemented, we just simply make a rule that says the same thing, or in some cases, we even just refer to the statute in the rule. We don't even restate it. So there's I think in some cases, folks think we're going to take whatever's passed and then try to interpret it and get creative with the rules, but that's not, when the rule is very prescriptive, that's not what happens. We essentially implement that prescriptive requirement. We may do it through rulemaking, but it's basically taking directly verbatim from the statute.
I understand. I defer to my colleagues for a follow-up.
Representative Dutzy?
Yeah, I have been frustrated by the argument that I have been hearing, that if we pass this law, our hands we will be hamstrung as a department. If that in fact is true, and if every law that we pass may have the opportunity, has to be followed to the letter of the law, then I would ask, why am I seeing a solid waste report in 2021 that by law was supposed to be updated in, I believe, 2008? And I think I think we are using that argument to discredit the stringent aspects of this law, which many people feel has been more than needed. So that's my frustration.
Thank you for your comments on that. And Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Director Wimsatt, with the focus on groundwater, which to me is extremely important because groundwater feeds everything, whether it be surface water or whatever. And it's precipitation that creates a lot of our surface water, as does the groundwater. And as you stated, by monitoring the groundwater, you're also monitoring the surface water. Is that a correct statement?
It's certainly, the groundwater data is very relevant to nearby surface water quality, certainly. But I will point out that we do have a number of landfills that are situated in proximity to rivers, and we do monitor the river water quality as well. So there's monitoring of both the groundwater and the river water.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So even though our rules are older, we are continually monitoring. And if my understanding is correct, you would like to see a 2-year study done to make sure that we encompass our geological differences in New Hampshire compared to other states, to make sure we properly implement the rules and the legislation to make this the best possible we can. Is that correct?
Yes, we believe that the study, another bill that does propose that a study be done would be really helpful to us. It's clear to us that folks are very concerned about the current status of our surface water setback criteria and our siting criteria. And there's a lot of looking around at neighboring states and their specific requirements. That's a complicated business, because whenever you look at rules or the law in another jurisdiction, those have to be read in the context of that jurisdiction's entire body of law and rules. So it's not just a simple, oh, well, they do this, so we could do the same thing. And we believe that a review of our current rules and the way that we implement them, along with a review of neighboring states' approaches to this, would be very helpful and informative to the department as it embarks on proposing new rules that would address siting criteria.
Thank you. Representative Nab.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a couple of comments. One is, I recognize that the 200 feet is a minimum. I also, in my experience, feel that if a developer or a business wants the minimum, they will do everything in their power to get the minimum, and they will throw lawyers into that. They will throw their own experts into that. And I feel like this bill gives DES a little bit more coverage to be able to say that they want a further setback. I hope no one in this room thinks 200 feet is an appropriate minimum, because I certainly don't. The second thing I'll say is that Representative Dutsey made a really good point last week that we can find a hydrogeologist, I think, to say we need a mile, and a hydrogeologist to say 200 feet is fine. And the process of going through this 2-year study seems to involve an RFP that hires a consultant that makes recommendations. And I'm really concerned that we could easily find a hydrogeologist that says everything's fine as it is, let's leave it. And I don't think this committee wants to be in that place in 2 years of having a recommendation coming back to us that's it's fine as it is, let's leave it as it is. I don't think that people are comfortable with that. And that's my concern with the alternative process that has been laid out in doing a 2-year study. It's pushing this down the road when we've had 30 years to get a better process. Thank you.
Representative Murray?
And thank you, Madam Chair. And to your point, I think that we also want to make sure that we are giving the state the opportunity, like you had mentioned, to have a little bit more clarity in statute, as well as the protection for the people who are out here asking for protection of in statute, of their water quality and their water. To Representative Comtois' point, groundwater is important, and I think that folks before this committee several times have said, if we don't have clean water, we don't have much of anything else. And I think that that's really what we're asking for to be the focus here when we're asking for something to be put in statute versus rules.
Representative Creighton?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Director Wimsatt, for your comments. Not really just a statement. In my mind, I live on a river. My business involves freshwater and fishing and all that. And so we drink our own well water. So I'm well aware of the importance of that. What I don't want to do, though, is rush to failure. And what I'm hearing from the director is that we have a direct interest in maintaining safe water. But what I don't want to do is jump to push the button and have unintended consequences to where we say, hey, do this. And all of a sudden say, well, you told us to do that. Well, why did this happen? Well, I don't think we have enough information to say that if we push the button, that something that we don't intend to happen will happen. And I know you've been a lot longer than I have. I got it, ma'am. I got it. I'm new. I was on RRD last year. But what I don't want to do is punch that button and then a bunch of stuff happens that I don't want to have happen. Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry.
Oh, sure. Representative Dutsey?
Thank you, Madam Chair. We have been dealing with this for a long time. And I think for some of us who have been on this committee, I mean, it's really head scratching to see what we went through for 2 years and the representatives that we had who jumped through hoops to make this a good bill. And it was a good bill. And it had great bipartisan support in the House. Last year, we even overrode the governor's veto. And all of a sudden, the same bill, and the only changes that were made were to appease the governor, okay? So it's basically the same bill, and all of a sudden, we're getting all of this pushback. And it seems to me the only reason we're getting the pushback is that there's another bill in the works that would allow the can to be kicked down the road 2 more years. And so, with all due respect, I honestly don't think we're rushing to judgment. A lot of work, I wasn't involved in it, but a lot of work was done on this bill in the past 2 years.
Thank you, Representative Dutsey. I just want to add one thing is that my issue is regarding, and I think there's a lot of really good positive aspects of this bill and its amendment, but I'm really torn with a statement that was made by Nikki Dillard Roy, one of the people who testified, who said that use and consideration of a single highest measurement is not representative of a real field geologic, hydrogeologic conditions. And I believe Director Wimsatt had also alluded to that. I'm just wondering if by putting that in place, we are then eliminating a lot of sites that would be appropriate. And Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To that point, I understand your perspective, and that is food for thought when we're thinking about this. But I also happen to wonder if not taking, when you look at other things like standards for other types of safety measures, they often err on the side of caution and public health and safety first, and put into protection the highest level of safety first. And I think that to that end, that's what we're asking to make sure that we have, because we don't, the EPA doesn't say these might, liners might leak. It says if and when they will leak. And I think that we want to make sure that we have that 5 years of that buffer so that we're never dealing with another situation like this. And so to that end, Madam Chair, I respectfully posit that as food for thought as well.
Representative Nab.
I just had one other comment, which is to piggyback on what Representative Murray was saying. To me, I think, your first thing is making sure these things don't leak, right? That's the most important thing. And then the second thing is making sure if they do leak, which they will, that we have enough time to work on it. And the third piece is monitoring. And there's been a lot of emphasis from the DES about the monitoring and remediation, but I live in a town with a PFAS problem. No one talks about cleaning up the PFAS. They talk about giving people point of entry water systems. You can't put these things back once they've gotten out. And in a landfill, you're talking about not just PFAS, but heavy metals and other contaminants, that there's no real remediation. You cannot get these things back into the landfill once they are in your soil and your water. It's impossible. It's an impossible task. So, monitoring and remediation are important, but to me, they're sort of the last piece. And here we are addressing the middle piece of what happens when there is a leak and how much time do we have to address it, and how many ways can we consider protecting our bodies of water. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Dutsey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I mean, I think we're in a real dilemma on this. If I would look at this bill, and I would basically say we have a major stakeholder, which is DES, and I would say bring DES into the fold and have them make suggestions. But from what I've been hearing is DES does not feel that it has the expertise in order to do that. So we're left with a situation that you have dueling hydrogeologists, and we're getting conflicting information. And I will admit, it's a real dilemma. I think for this committee to try to figure out what the right formula is very difficult. But the fact of the matter is, these dueling hydrologists for the last 2 years have been battling it out, and this is the bill that we came up with that was passed. And since DES has already said it does not have the expertise to properly advise us on this, why not go forward with this bill and laws can be changed? And if it doesn't work out and if it's hamstrung, I think this committee would be very willing to come back, to listen to DES based on the experience that they're now having, because it's in all of us, our best interest to site these landfills in the most appropriate way. And I mean, I don't think we want to be working, we don't want to be working against DES. We want to be working with you, but if the expertise isn't there, and clearly we're not defining any expertise, we have dueling expertise, I would say go forward with the bill and make changes if needed. And we've done that, we do that on an annual basis with other bills.
Representative Howard.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We all received a rather impassioned email from a constituent, and one of the points that she made, I share, and that is that regulation is about, this is to quote her, about being protective of the environment, and there's nothing wrong with using the maximum value measured for a calculation. I think, to the point that's been made earlier, shouldn't we, when it comes to protecting the environment and human health, shouldn't we be erring on the side of caution?
Representative Germana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I have a question that I was thinking about last week as well, and it connects with some of the points that I agree with that Representative Creighton has raised. I always want to have as much data, to work with as possible, to make sure that our laws are based as much as they can be in solid science, no pun intended. But What I'm wondering about when we talk about if we take a rule that applies, say, in the state of Maine, or a law in the state of Maine, we apply it in New Hampshire. I understand that if we look at 602, I think that's an example where there's a lot of language in that. It's very deeply embedded in statute and rule in Maine. There's a case where I think that would be problematic. In this case, though, the question I have in terms of what kinds of information we would hope to get from more hydrogeological studies, and perhaps you can explain to me why I'm confused about this, or correct me if I'm wrong. For given types of say bedrock or clay or gravel, and I apologize for my highly inaccurate and use of geological terms, but isn't there's kind of a value in the sense of, if we describe something as bedrock, it has a certain defined value in terms, for example, of how quickly water is going to move through bedrock as opposed to clay or gravel or silt, et cetera, right? The composition, the density, et cetera, of that layer of earth has a particular value. And I don't believe that value is different in Maine than it is in New Hampshire. Our strata may be different, right? So when we drill, we're going to find different amounts of bedrock, clay, silt, gravel, et cetera. But the value that we would use to calculate the seepage velocity is not going to be different in Maine bedrock as it is in New Hampshire bedrock. So I have a difficult time understanding how more hydrogeological studies are going to change those basic facts, which brings me back to the belief that that velocity from the source to the groundwater measured in time is a much more accurate way of measuring setback than distance, which, as you all know, you've heard me say a few times, is actually a measure of time. So am I mistaken in saying that different types of earth have different values in terms of water transmission, and that's not going to be different in Maine than in New Hampshire?
Well, actually, first of all, I've acknowledged, I think, in prior questions and answers, that the idea of using time of travel is not, the agency doesn't necessarily have any objection to that. To go to your first question about, even bedrock, how fast or whether water moves through bedrock is different depending on the bedrock. And bedrock in New Hampshire is different in different places in New Hampshire. In some places, very little water will move through it if it's very competent rock with very low levels of fracturing. Other areas where it may be very weathered and fractured, water may move very readily through bedrock. So it is very site specific, even if you have a particular type of medium, whether it's bedrock or till or shell or gravel or sand. All of those things have a range of hydraulic conductivity. They're still till, they're still bedrock, but there may be a wide range of hydraulic conductivity in a particular unit. So it is very specific to the formation and to the particular site. So just to be clear on that. When I've spoken previously about concerns about using rules from another state, we haven't done a lot of analysis on this, but our staff have spent some time talking with staff from the state of Maine, and it isn't clear to me that the rules that are being cited here and suggested for inclusion in New Hampshire are necessarily implemented in Maine in the way that this committee thinks they are, because there are other factors that are different about our rules. And it appears to us, and again, this is based on a minimal amount of analysis and communication, that in reality, the way those rules are constructed but the way they're implemented doesn't really result in the result that I think this committee is expecting from that. And by that, I mean that the kinds of allowances for the time of travel in Maine, maybe things that are already required by New Hampshire rules that would not get you any additional time of travel allowance in New Hampshire, and that the variance opportunities that they have for various requirements are not opportunities that exist in New Hampshire law. So it's just, all I was trying to say from that is that it's very hazardous to just take a particular set of rules from another state and drop them into another state's entire legal and law and rule paradigm, because you can't always, you can't be sure that the result will be what you think it is. It takes a lot of analysis for that. The agency does believe that it has the expertise and the ability to evaluate this question, but we do think we need a couple of years to do it right, and we would like to have the additional benefit of a third party taking a eyes wide open look at our rules and neighboring states' rules and giving us opinions on that. We may not agree with those opinions, or we very likely we would take some of them and maybe discard others because we don't find them to be valid. I don't want to judge a study before it's been done, but we think that in order to do the careful analysis to arrive at a place where we all can say we have a set of siting rules with respect to surface water setbacks that are appropriate and protective in New Hampshire, we think it's going to take some time to do that properly.
Representative Murray.
Thank you. In the interest of time and seeing where the time is at, I would just like to say that it is my opinion that this is actually very pro-business in the sense that it makes it very clear about where to even begin looking to start an initial point of siting through exploration, because this is actually requiring a third-party hydrogeologist to take a look at where the siting would meet that 5-year distance to travel. And if that isn't met, then they can look elsewhere immediately to begin seeking an alternate, more suitable place to site their landfill.
Thank you. Representative Haskins.
And just a final comment, with respect, this is not talking about 602. This is an attempt to update a situation which is a 30-year-old rule, and there is going to be pressure to site a landfill in other areas that perhaps we have not had to deal with before. So this is protective, this is an update. To study it is to definitely kick the can down the road, because we have been here before and we're trying to give the department a standard which we believe can be met and will be protective, and the department can spend the time developing the rules to follow what the statute will say. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Comtois, did you have a question? No. So I know we don't want to talk about this other bill that we haven't even read yet that's supposedly coming from the other side of the wall. But I mean, I would think that there is really nothing that says that, both bills wouldn't be appropriate. I mean, we could put something into statute now and have some other studies being done in tandem, and then come back and after these studies are done and re-examine what we have in statute and make appropriate changes. Is that what's anybody's thoughts on that? No. Okay. In the interest of time, I think that we want to end this work session unless anybody has anything other significant points to make. I know we've talked about this to death already. I am going to recess the committee, close the work session, recess this committee so that our appropriate sides can caucus, and also give Representative Murray some time to go down to OLS and make the appropriate change to the amendment for HB 253. So I am going to request that everybody clear the room so that we can caucus about what we've heard this morning, and then return. Well, we were supposed to exec these bills at 10:30. It's already 10:30. Why don't we come back at 11 o'clock? And we can then proceed to do the exec on those two bills. And afterwards, we will have a presentation by some guests that we have today from CSG. So we will see you all back at 11 o'clock. So Representative Alexander, and I guess there's, yeah,
Democrats for meeting 403.
Sorry, I don't want.
so we've got Representative Alexander.
You got Healy and
I need to go testify next door.
you're right there. Right where you're standing, right there.
Tell me what you want me to do. My head's not. My daughter, my other daughter, shot at 6:30 this morning, was brought to the hospital in Rochester. She's got some sort of infection. She couldn't walk. They took her by ambulance. So I've got a daughter at Boston Children's and now a daughter at frickin' Frisbee. So I'm totally not in the game of any of this shit. So, to be honest, I care less. Nobody.
Can you state?
And then I've
what
got
you
people
next?
pounding me to get over there to the parental rights thing to testify, and then the other nightmare and stuff that's going on. So I will say an exec or whatever.
If you could do that, I appreciate it.
The exec will take 5-10 minutes, literally.
So I don't know enough about, so how many sites right now are leaching into our water? Is that
So
happening?
so
I know this is for sites, a potential site, I get it.
Okay. The existing land sites that are in operation right now
Correct.
are not leaching.
None of them.
Okay, good morning and welcome back to Environment and Agriculture Committee. The same, yeah. Please, everybody get in your seats, settle down. And what I will do now is open up the exec session for HB 253. HB 253, establishing a committee to study extended producer responsibility. Representative Murray, do you have a motion?
Yes, Madam Chair. I'd like to speak to the amendment, a motion for the amendment, please.
Sure.
And that is for Amendment 2023-0797H. And I'd like to make a motion of ought to pass for the amendment. And
Do I
if
hear a
may-
second?
Madam Chair, I second.
Thank you, Representative Creighton seconds. Would you like to speak to the amendment?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Based on the work study session that we just had, I made the suggested changes. We made sure that on line 14, the word examine was corrected. And per the input, we had eliminated paragraph 7 and simply changed the language on line 24 to read, and may propose topics for further study.
Thank you for that. Okay. Any other discussion on this amendment of 0797H for HB 253? Seeing none, I direct the clerk to call the roll on the vote on this amendment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The motion is to adopt Amendment 2023-079H for House Bill 253. Representative Creighton.
Yay.
Representative Comtois, yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Healy.
Yes.
Representative Pratt.
Yes.
Representative Coulon. Representative Kenny. Representative Potenza.
Yes.
Representative Smart. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Cahill.
Yes.
Representative Dutsey. Representative Murray.
Yes.
Representative Jamana.
Yes.
Representative Haskins.
Yes.
Representative Howard. Representative Nab. Representative Morse. Representative Voigt.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
20-0 motion passes.
thank you. Do I hear a motion? Representative Murray? Oh, Representative Dutsey.
Yes.
Sorry.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to move OTPA on HB 253, and I would like to commend the committee on the discussion. I think we made it a better bill, and I'm hopeful it will pass. Thank you.
Do I hear a second?
Madam Chair, I second.
Thank you, Representative Creighton. Would you like to speak to your motion, Representative Dutsey?
No, I think everything's been said. I think this is an important bill, and it's a first step in having us look at how we can reduce debris going into the landfill. And thank you very much.
Okay, any other further discussion on this amendment and this bill? Seeing none, I'd like to direct the clerk to please call the roll.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're voting OTPA on House Bill 253 with Amendment 2023-079H. Representative Creighton.
Yay.
Representative Comtois, yes. Representative Alexander.
Yes.
Representative Healy.
Yes.
Representative Pratt.
Yes.
Representative Coulon. Representative Kenny. Representative Potenza.
Yes.
Representative Smart. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Cahill.
Yes.
Representative Dutsey. Representative Murray.
Yes.
Representative Jamana.
Yes.
Representative Haskins.
Yes.
Representative Howard. Representative Nab. Representative Morse. Representative Voigt.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
20-0 motion passes.
Without objection, I'd like to place this on consent. Okay, it'll be on consent. Thank you very much. With that, I will close the exec session for HB 253, and I will open up the exec session on HB 56. Do I hear a motion?
Yes. Madam
Representative Murray.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to move Amendment 2023-0772H to House Bill 56.
Do I hear a second? Oh, Representative Dutsey. would you like to speak to your amendment, please? Yes.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would. Thank you very much. Folks had worked incredibly hard over the last several years to come up with what we felt was an appropriate response to setting policy and statute to protect our water and ground resources. And to that end, we have, for the most part, kept the original bill intact and worked in good faith to get buy-in from various stakeholders that would support the bill. And that is the effort that you see before us in 0772H.
Thank you. Do I hear any other discussion about this amendment? Yes, we did. Representative Dutsey. Any other discussion about this amendment? Okay, seeing none, I would like to have the roll call to vote.
Thank you, Madam Chair. We're voting to adopt Amendment 2023-0772H. Representative Creighton.
Nay.
Representative Comtois. No. Representative Alexander.
No.
Representative Healy.
No.
Representative Pratt.
No.
Representative Coulon. Representative Kenny. Representative Potenza.
No.
Representative Smart. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Cahill.
Yes.
Representative Dutsey. Representative Murray.
Yes.
Representative Germana.
Yes.
Representative Haskins.
Yes.
Representative Howard. Representative Nab. Representative Morse. Representative Voigt.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
No.
10-10, motion fails.
Okay, so that brings us back to the original bill. Do I hear a motion on that bill? Representative Murray.
Yes, Madam Chair, I would like to propose a motion about to pass on House Bill 56.
Do I hear a second? Thank you, Representative Dutsey. Any discussion on the underlying bill?
Madam Chair, I think that most of what was discussed in the amendment could also apply to the underlying bill. And it is our position that we feel that there is a need for protection in statute to make sure that our groundwater is clearly and definitively protected. Thank you.
Representative Comtois.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I believe that DES is doing a good job with what they're doing in monitoring. We are constantly, their rules state that we are to monitor the groundwater, which is extremely important. And we know that other states who have this 5-year travel setback do not require double liners, as does the state of New Hampshire. And we know that they have a lot of exceptions in their rules, which if we put this into statute, will tie the hands of DES and the rulemaking authority.
Thank you, Representative Comtois. Representative Creighton.
Yes, ma'am. I agree completely that we need to protect our groundwater. And I believe that we should act to do so. But I do believe that this is a case of ready, fire, aim, and that we need to take more time and figure out exactly how we do that. Over.
Representative Howard.
I think the preceding statutes that covering this this area are 30 years old. There's a lot of science in the last 30 years, and a lot of discovery of things that we didn't even know about 30 years ago that we need to protect against. And I think that we need to take steps now to update the law.
Representative Potenza.
I agree with what she's saying, but I know that there is a bill that's coming from the Senate, and because of that, in regards with redundancy, I believe that that we should focus on that, which is coming down the pike soon, and it's better and well written.
Representative Murray.
Just a point of order, if I may.
Yes.
I would like to stay clearly focused on the bills before this committee, if I may.
Sure. Yes.
And to that end, may I speak to it?
Yeah, we shouldn't really be thinking or talking about bills that may or may not come to this committee. And I believe that that's a valid point to bring up. So I just want to remind our members here. Did you want to say anything else? No, Representative Sofakidis.
For the years that I've been here, people have come to this committee for remedy for problems in siting landfills, and they keep coming up empty. This, the people of New Hampshire are our stakeholders. They ask us to come here to do a job, and I might act like I'm not involved in what's going on, but this is like maybe the fourth time I've been through this process. I have been up to the Country, and I have toured those landfills, and the people came for help, and we can't just keep saying, oh well, we're gonna study it, or we're gonna have some other thing. It's not. They need protections, and they need us to make a decision. The fact that DES was so far behind in giving this solid waste plan to us, years and years and years behind. I guess I just ask you to think about when the damage is done. It's like trying to put the toothpaste back into a toothpaste tube. It's a very, very difficult job. We have high cancer clusters in this state, and we can tout liberty, we can tout lack of regulations, we can deregulate everything, but things don't come the way of the small people, of these small towns who don't have big budgets to protect themselves. And so I just would ask that this is the third time I have heard this bill, and I would really ask people to think in their hearts about your children, your grandchildren, and instead of thinking about a company or a business, think about the cancer clusters. Thank you.
Okay. Representative Smart.
I think that I agree with protection and making, once something happens, it's too late kind of thing. I agree with that, but I think that things need to be site specific. I think one size fits all is not the way to go when it comes to this. I think the land is too diverse. The area is too diverse, and I think we need to have a more diverse bill rather than one size fits all. That's my.
Representative Haskins.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I agree with that also. I do think that this bill gives DES a standard. I believe that they can meet it. I believe the rulemaking needs to meet the standard. I believe that we can respect the work that's gone into this, that it was essentially a bipartisan bill that was passed. And I can't understand why we want to roll back protection and go backwards. So I support the bill strongly. Thank you.
Representative Germana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And with respect, genuinely meant respect to Representative Smart's point about need for site-specific information, I would argue this is site-specific, right? You do tests on specific sites, and what in the end happens is based upon the science that is conducted with site-specific tests. I also want to piggyback on something Representative Safakidis pointed out, is the argument that she made that in the end we have to decide who it is that we are representing on this committee and in the House. And I think if we do that, then the answer should always be to err on the side of caution, particularly given some of the hard lessons Granite Staters have already learned about these issues. And finally, I would say that with the question about further studies, we have had ample time to conduct these studies. DES has had ample time to conduct these studies. This is not a new conversation. It is time for the legislature to act because what we've seen is over and over again kicking the can down the road for various reasons, none of which I think are ultimately sustainable. So the studies that should have been done already should have been done. Apparently they haven't been, and it's time for the legislature to take action to put this into statute and to follow through to make sure the appropriate actions are taken. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? I just want to say, first of all, I want to thank this committee for all of the diligence, the questions, thought-provoking comments that have been made, and made in a very civil and helpful manner. We've worked hard on this. I know Representative Murray worked very hard on this, and I want to thank you for all the work that everybody on this committee has put in on to this particular issue. It's not an easy issue. And, you know, when it comes down to creating legislation, something that's going to be law, it's daunting for all of us, I think, to really make that consideration and say, yes, this is what should be. And I think with that, we have, you know, been very, very careful in our thoughts on dealing with this. And anybody who is voting against this bill, it's not because they don't want to see, you know, clean water, or they don't want to see, you know, horrible things happen. They you know, they want all good things to happen. DES also wants to do things right and do it in the best way possible. And I think that we want to make sure that we have state law that's not going to be binding any agency's hands and is going to give them the flexibility that they need to deal with situations as they unfold in any particular landfill siting issue. For me, this has been particularly difficult because I do believe that change has to be made, but I also want to be very careful with the change that we do make. And my hesitation with this particular legislation has really been, again, the one size fits all and making a prescriptive change, especially when it comes to, you know, hydrogeological conditions, which I know very little about. I think that when we, as a body, consider using a single highest measurement that may not be representative of the entire site, that we're treading into some very difficult water. And so for me, that is why I'm inclined not to vote yes on this bill. But irrespective of that, whatever my reasons are, I think this committee has done an amazing job, an enormous job, considering all the pros and cons, and I want to thank you. With that, I direct the clerk to call the roll, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is OTP on HB 56. Representative,
253. Yeah, 56, I'm sorry.
okay. Representative Creighton.
Nay.
Representative Comtois. No. Representative Alexander.
No.
Representative Healy.
No.
Representative Pratt.
No.
Representative Coulon. Representative Kenny. Representative Potenza.
No.
Representative Smart. Representative Sofakidis. Representative Cahill.
Yes.
Representative Dutsey. Representative Murray.
Yes.
Representative Jamana.
Yes.
Representative Haskins.
Yes.
Representative Howard. Representative Nab. Representative Morse. Representative Voigt.
Yes.
Madam Chair,
Nay.
10-10, no recommendation.
Thank you. And who will write the for the OTP
I will.
report? And I will write against.
Okay.
Thank you. I appreciate again all the work this committee has done on all of the bills that we've had come before us. That pretty much does it for all the bills until we get anything from the Senate side. And I am going to close out the exec session for HB 56. And I would like to invite our guests to come up and speak to us today from the Council of State Governments. They are prior chairs of this committee, the Honorable Tara Sad and the Honorable Rob Hafner. Welcome to our committee, and thank you for sitting through a very interesting morning.
It was interesting to us. We started in 2006 together. We were elected in 2006, and we always served on this committee the entire 10 years we were in the House. And how many bills did we have on landfill siting? Lots. And we went through the same process. And, you know, it's sort of like we were talking about kicking the can down the road. We were some of the ones that kicked it, one of the original ones. So we are sort of disheartened to see that it's still here. It's still a subject, and it hasn't been fixed, but, you know.
Someone earlier said, we've been discussing this for a long while. Well, we were discussing in 2006, if that helps.
Right, exactly. It's a tough issue, but one that is critically important to the health and safety of the people in the state. So you guys did a great job. I mean, the thoughtful thinking that went behind it is great. So anyway, why we're here. As we said, I'm Tara Sad. This is Bob Hefner. I'm from Walpole, which is the prettiest town in the entire state, and one with more dairy farms than any other town. And
I'm from Hudson, where.
Can't hear you.
you have to.
Okay. I'm from Hudson, and she may have more dairy farms, but we've got better bottomland to grow crops on.
I'm on the Connecticut River, which has the best bottomland of any. We do this and have been doing it for 16 years now. After leaving the House, we were asked to join the Council of State Governments. Does everyone know what Council of State Governments is? Okay. Council of State Governments is a membership organization that all the states in the country pay membership dues to, and because of that, we work for you. We are the agriculture and rural affairs policy consultants for the Eastern region. So we have 11 northeastern states from Maryland, Pennsylvania, New York, and all of New England, and 5 Eastern Canadian provinces, and 2 territories, Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. It's fun to go to conferences down there, especially in the wintertime. What we do is we provide research services for you if you need anything. We do conferences. We do policy summits. But the thing that we do most is we introduce you to your compatriots in other states. You get to know who the people are in Vermont who are dealing with the same issues pretty much that you are here, and finding out what they have done about it, looking to see any legislation that would work here or tricks to solving a problem, because in the Northeast, agriculture and rural issues are pretty much all the same. When we deal with, like NCSL is another organization similar to us. They're a national organization. So if they deal with agriculture, they deal with Iowa, they deal with Oklahoma, they deal with California, their ag is completely different than ours. We're not a commodity region. And so we need to group together all of our 11 states and come up with legislation that works for us, and then lobby the federal government when they're dealing with the Farm Bill, which is in negotiations now, so that we are protected and we get what we need in fighting the Iowa and the Kansases. So anyway.
And to that point, when we combine our 11 states and speak as a voice, we've got 20% of Congress. So it is, in fact, a voice that can compete with the Californias of the world.
There are important things coming up, of course, in the Farm Bill. Number one, the nutrition title. all of the SNAP benefits, the school lunches, everything like that. It's huge. And those are being negotiated now. So we need to watch out for our citizens as far as what is included there. Commodities, actually, the specialty crops are included in that. It never was before. So we have a voice there for our small farmers who are doing vegetables and fruits and things like that instead of competing with the soybeans and the corn. What else? Go.
I think the other thing that we really should mention is among things that we do, Tara mentioned that we'll do research for you and that type of thing, lobbying for the Farm Bill. In fact, one year, Tara and I took a resolution from our committee and went to a congressional hearing on the Farm Bill. And we actually spoke to Congress on that one and left them with our resolution. So there is a voice. Right. But the main thing I think we do is, and I think we do it pretty well, is we put on an annual meeting in which our committee generally tackles 3 topics at each one of our annual meetings, as well as taking some kind of a tour, usually farms, but it could be something else. This past year, we were here in Manchester.
It was fun.
We had a great 5-day session in Manchester, and the next one in August is going to be in Toronto. So if you would like to do some international travel, you may want to think about that.
But talking about our annual meeting, we always try to come up with topics that our members want to hear about so that we can decide what to focus on, what speakers to bring in, what experts to bring on to give us information and make it worthwhile for everyone. To that end, this afternoon, you're all going to be receiving an email that has a little survey link in it. I think there are like 10 questions or something like that, just so that you can choose from a list which topics you think are most important to you, so that we can take that into consideration when we're coming up with speakers and the topics. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd appreciate that a lot. What else?
And I think the other thing we'll mention is we also do policy summits. We are in the process of putting one together now that will be at the end of April in Baltimore. And Tara will tell you it's a really nice hotel.
Ooh, it's pretty.
And it is. But this will be a Friday afternoon and Saturday, and we're going to do a deep dive into labor issues for both farms and processing. So we've got milk producers that will be speaking. We've got the Chicken Council from Delaware and Maryland that will be speaking on chicken processing and farming.
John Huntington.
We've got the Huntingtons coming from right up the street here in Loudon, who are one of the biggest flour growers in the country, and they hire 350 H-2A workers a year. And they're going to come and talk about their problems. We've also got the U.S. Department of Labor coming with an expert on H-2A and H-2B labor. And I've probably missed, we've got the Secretary of Agriculture from Maryland coming. We have also invited the Executive Director of the Maryland Farm Bureau and a woman from rural Maryland who can shed some information on the problems with labor in the fishing industry.
Crabs.
Yes, and seafood farming as well. So
Anyway, so that's what we do. We enjoyed our 10 years here on this committee. We are sure and certain that it is the best committee in the House. And by watching you today, that just solidifies that fact that it really, really is a good committee. And congratulations on being on it. We hope you enjoy it as much as we enjoyed being on it. And give us a call if you need anything. And look for the email that I'm sending and fill out the survey. Any questions?
Sure. Well, thank you very much for joining us this morning. It's a pleasure to have you back in the House.
Thank you.
And I'm interested to know, when you guys, or each of you, took chairmanship at one point and sort of bounced it back between
Right.
party
Right.
majority.
Yes.
How many bills went through your committee at a time? I mean, we had
varied.
20.
Right.
This.
When we
it came
first
from
started
the House.
out, it was in the 30s. We had a lot of bills for E&A. And then sometimes it was like 12 and 11. And you wonder, like, are we going to continue being a committee if we have so few bills? But then I see it's cyclical. It goes up and down and up and down depending on what the issues are. Like I say, it's amazing how the same bills keep coming back over and over and over again, like landfills. But that's what keeps it interesting.
Do you have a sense of what a majority of bills were? I mean, were you dealing more with, say, cat and dog bills than you were with?
And that was also
Farm
cyclical. That
bills
was
or
also
agriculture?
cyclical. One of the big ones that we had in our committee in our tenure was GMOs.
GMOs.
That was huge. That was huge and painful because that was very divisive. And normally, like before, in the execs that we just heard, it tends to be unanimous. We had most of our bills on the consent calendar because normally ag is not a partisan issue, thank heavens, unlike other committees where that's all they deal with. So, yeah, so Bob is a Republican and I'm a Democrat, in case you didn't know this. And so back in the days, every year, every election, the majority would switch. And so we would just switch chairs, Yeah. But we still work together. Yeah. Even though he's wrong on it. But that's okay. That's okay.
You're like a married couple, huh?
He says the same about.
Yeah, I do. Tara mentioned the GMO bill. That got really national attention when it was here. And Tara and I were speaking on the floor in opposition to the bill. Both of us were. And it was a partisan bill. But Tara and I were in agreement and we spoke in opposition to it. And we found out later that there were people in Maine at the Farm Bureau that were cheering us on from their offices up in Augusta.
Because they had a bill that had passed in Maine banning GMOs or requiring labeling. And in order for theirs to go through, in the bill, it said that New Hampshire has to pass this before ours will go through. It had to be, the neighboring state. And so because we didn't pass ours, theirs was not in effect either, which left Vermont pretty much out there on its own at the time. That was a tough one. And then we also had animal cruelty bills. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. That was the animal activists that would come and testify and cry. And, it was just really bad. So,
Including coming from Nebraska.
oh yeah, they came all the way from Nebraska to testify. They were huge. I mean, people lined out in the hallway waiting to testify. Big, big, big. Those were the main ones. Most of the time it is small things, but important to agriculture and to the area, which is great. Yeah, it's the best committee. Anything else?
Does anybody have any questions for our guests? Representative Haskins.
I'll see you in Toronto.
Are you coming? Oh, good, 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 good. Oh, we're going to have fun.
Yes.
I know, I know. The trouble is for our tour, our field trip, it takes about 2 hours to get outside of Toronto because it's such a big city and traffic is so bad. So I think we're going to wind up going to the huge, huge, huge farmers market downtown Toronto, which will be fun. I know.
Great.
That'll be good.
Looking forward to it.
And it'll be good. And so you're going to help us determine what you're going to be listening to. Good, thank you, Representative. Anyway.
Any other questions, comments from the committee? No? Thank you very much for
Thank
joining
you.
us this morning. It was
We appreciate it.
informative, and
Thank
we appreciate your time.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, we're going to be back again with the whole organization. We just wanted to come because of the committee
Sure.
on the 20th and 21st.
20th and
Yeah.
21st.
So if you see us in the halls, you just say hi.
Okay. And thank you so much for your past service to the state and the
And
legislature.
you for your current
Thank you.
duty.
Take care.
It's all volunteer.
All right. Thank you. So with that, we've ended early today, and again, I want to thank everybody for their work and their attention, and due diligence. Appreciate it. Sure, Representative Germana.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just found out, I don't know if anyone else had heard this, just found out that Representative Partial, who is sponsor of the extended producer responsibility bill, had a heart attack after the last House session and
my.
went into cardiac arrest in the ambulance afterwards. And he's at home recovering. He plans to be here on Thursday. But if you know Representative Partial, or want to reach out to him and check in with him. I only just found that out because I texted him to let him know about his bill going on the consent calendar and just found out. So anyway, you see him on Thursday, or if you send him an email or something, just to let him know you're thinking of him.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. With that, we're adjourned. Appreciate it.
So this is what I'm reporting in, 20 to nothing, consent, 10 to 10, and then that'll go as no recommendation.
Right.
And they'll figure that out.
Yeah. Well, I'm gonna send something to Jamie later today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I wanted to give you this because you're coming. You need to come. It's invitational, you need to come. So,
Okay.
okay.
Okay. Thank
I'll get you there, so
Thank you. Okay. Appreciate
I'm going to
it.
send you the link to register.
Okay.
It's free, and everything is free. So
All right. Thank you.
it's a pleasure to meet you.
Nice meeting you, Jim.
Yes, Tara Sackins. Welcome to Phoenix.
I guess I'm going to Baltimore. Yes. Here. Let's see. Here.
Thank you. Thank you, I appreciate it. Okay, so we're done.
We're
No Senate
done.
bills, now,
No
right?
Senate bills.
Which is like one.
Is it?
I
don't know.
I don't know.
Okay, so I've got a.
That's good. Yeah.